Episode 1 ended with Jo standing over two dead men on her own porch. Episode 2 picks up that thread and immediately makes it worse because it turns out the fallout from that night doesn't stay contained to one front door. It spreads across an entire neighborhood, an entire agency, and eventually straight into Jo's living room. No Sorrow Like the Survivor is less about the next mission and more about what happens in the hours after a mission blows up in your face. And it might be one of the most quietly devastating hours Lioness has put together yet. So let's break down everything that happens in Lioness Season 3, Episode 2. What it reveals, what it's setting up, and why that closing scene might be the most important 5 minutes of the season so far. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of scene-by-scene digging we do every week on every major spy thriller and prestige drama. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the rest of this Lioness Season 3 coverage. Winning the extraction was the easy part. Living with what it costs is where this episode actually lived. Rather than picking straight back up where Episode 1 left off, the show opens in the present day with a tense interrogation scene involving a high-value asset. It's a short sequence, but it's doing a lot of quiet work because it confirms right away that whatever protections were supposed to keep the Lioness program's people safe have already failed completely. The framing is clinical and controlled cold lighting, with minimal dialogue, the kind of scene where every question feels like it's testing for a leak rather than gathering intelligence. If the agency is sitting across the table from Aleksi while simultaneously dealing with a compromised operator on home soil, that tells you the walls between the op and the operators have come down, and nobody in that room fully trust containment anymore. It's a smart way to open the hour because it sets a tone of paranoia before we even cut back to Jo's street. From there, the episode rewinds to the immediate aftermath of the doorstep shooting we saw close out Episode 1. And this is where the hour really finds its footing. A quick reaction force rolls into Jo's quiet, ordinary Washington, D.C. neighborhood to run a covert sweep of the area, and the show leans hard into the discomfort of that image. Operators in night vision clearing rooftops and hopping fences in suburbia, all of it dressed up publicly as some kind of routine federal matter so the neighbors don't ask questions. It's an unsettling sequence precisely because it's so mundane on the surface. Manicured lawns, quiet streets, kids' bikes probably still sitting in driveways, while a full tactical response unfolds around them like it's a war zone. That contrast is the whole point of the episode's title. Honestly, survival doesn't look like triumph. It looks like soldiers combing through your cul-de-sac at 3 in the morning, doing everything they can to make sure a war fought overseas doesn't get traced back to a house with a swing set in the yard. The sweep doesn't stay quiet for long, either. It boils over into a sudden, violent confrontation that shatters whatever calm the operation was trying to maintain and puts the entire neighborhood on alert. Lights come on in windows up and down the block, and suddenly the fiction that this is a routine federal matter becomes almost impossible to sustain. Whatever cover story the agency planned to use to explain two dead bodies on a suburban porch, that story just got a lot harder to sell, and it raises the obvious question of how long Jo's identity and her family's location can possibly stay protected once local law enforcement, neighbors, and probably local news start asking why there was a firefight on a residential street in the middle of the night. It also puts an uncomfortable spotlight on the agency itself. Containing a leak overseas is one thing, but containing a leak that's now visible to an entire American neighborhood is an entirely different, much harder problem. If you want the rest of this season broken down scene by scene the moment each episode drops, subscribe and turn on notifications. We're covering every episode of Lioness Season 3 all the way to the final. Away from the chaos at Jo's house, the episode widens its lens through Byron Westfield, played by Michael Kelly, who sits down face-to-face with a powerful foreign adversary connected to the security breach. The scene starts almost casual, the kind of guarded, testing the waters small talk you'd expect between two men who have spent careers reading people for a living before it curdles into something much colder, with the adversary laying out threats that make it clear this conflict isn't only being fought with drones and extraction team. There's a real elegance to how the show stages this exchange. Nobody raises their voice, nobody reaches for a weapon, and yet it's arguably tenser than the entire suburban firefight that comes before it. Some of the most dangerous moves this season are going to happen in rooms exactly like this one, over quiet conversation instead of gunfire. It's a smart structural choice for the episode, because it reminds you that Aleksi's extraction didn't just anger Russia in the abstract. It put specific powerful people on notice, and at least one of them now knows exactly who to lean on and exactly how much leverage a threat against Byron's own position, or even his own family, could buy. The scariest threat this episode isn't a drone swarm. It's a man across a table smiling while he says the quiet part out loud. Here's where the episode plants its most unsettling seed for the rest of the season. As agency leadership scrambles to figure out how their operation got blown so badly, a theory starts to form that the breach may not have started with the shootout at Jo's house at all. It may go all the way back to the original deployment in Ukraine. If that holds up, it means Aleksi wasn't just a valuable target the CIA got lucky enough to pull out of a pipeline tunnel. He may have been bait the whole time, dangled specifically to lure Jo's team into a position where they could be tracked, exposed, exposed or worse. That would retroactively reframe almost everything from the premiere. Aleksandra's approach at the bar, the campus meeting, the favor, the CIA never fully explained. All of it starts to look less like an opportunity and more like a trap that worked exactly as designed. It's worth remembering, too, that Aleksandra herself told Joe her specialty was recruitment and infiltration, which means she practically told us, out loud in episode 1, that manipulation was the plan all along, and nobody in the room caught the warning for what it was. If the show confirms that theory in the coming episodes, it turns Joe's entire storyline this season into something much darker than a war she accidentally stumbled into. It makes her a target who was selected on purpose, and it means every move the team made in that pipeline tunnel may have been exactly what someone else wanted them to make. It's worth pausing on Kaitlin's position in all of this, because while she's not the center of any single set piece this episode, she's arguably the character absorbing the most pressure from every direction at once. She's the one who has to keep the interrogation of Aleksi productive without tipping into something that could be used against the agency later. She's the one who has to explain a suburban firefight to people above her who were never supposed to know about it. And she's the one who has to decide how much of the "was this a trap" theory gets shared with Joe versus buried until it's confirmed. That's an impossible needle to thread, and the show smartly keeps her mostly off to the side this episode, letting her reactions register in glances and clipped phone calls rather than long speeches. It's a quieter kind of pressure than what Joe or Byron are dealing with, but it might end up mattering just as much, because if Kaitlin is the one holding all the loose threads of this theory together, she's also the one person capable of either exposing the setup early or sitting on it long enough to make things worse. The episode saves its heaviest moment for the end, once the immediate danger has passed and Joe is finally able to get to her displaced family. And it's not the tough, composed operator we've watched all series. She falls apart completely in front of her husband, begging for forgiveness as everything her job has cost this family finally catches up with her all at once. It's a stark contrast to everything that came before it in the hour, and that's clearly deliberate. After an episode built around tactical sweeps, cold political threats, and a theory that the whole mission might have been a setup, the show chooses to end not on a cliffhanger, but on Joe simply breaking. It reframes the entire hour. This was never really about the operation surviving. It's about whether Joe's family does, and whether she can live with what it's already cost them even if they physically make it through. It's also the first time this season Joe looks less like an operator and more like someone realizing in real time that the version of herself she's protected at home for years might not be salvageable anymore. Whatever trust she's asking Neil for in that scene, it's clear she doesn't fully believe she's earned it, and that uncertainty is going to hang over the rest of the season. No Sorrow Like the Survivor is a genuinely strong follow-up precisely because it doesn't try to top the premiere's firefight. It does something harder and sits in the wreckage instead. The Suburban sweep is one of the most effective sequences the show has done, not because of scale, but because of how wrong it feels watching a warzone protocol play out on a residential street. The Byron scene proves the show doesn't need gunfire to generate tension, and that closing scene with Joe and Neil earns every second of its discomfort. My only real question heading into episode 3 is how far the show is willing to take the idea that Aleksi was a trap from the start, because if that's confirmed, it changes the entire moral calculus of everything Joe did in the premiere and turns Aleksandra into a far more dangerous figure than we've given her credit for. Either way, this episode does exactly what a strong second chapter should do. It makes the stakes feel more personal than the premiere without sacrificing any of the tension that got people watching in the first place. It also does something a lot of prestige thrillers struggle with. It lets a quieter, dialogue-driven scene carry as much weight as the loudest action sequence in the hour. The Byron confrontation and Joe's breakdown with Neil are both essentially two-person scenes with almost no movement, and yet they land harder than the tactical sweep that opens the episode's back half. That's a difficult balance to strike, and it suggests the writers are confident enough in this cast to slow down when the story calls for it, rather than manufacturing another firefight just to keep the pace up. If the back half of the season keeps trusting these quieter moments the way this episode does, Lioness might end up delivering its most emotionally grounded season yet, even with a possible conspiracy stretching all the way back to that gas pipeline in Donetsk. That's the full breakdown of Lioness Season 3, Episode 2. Let me know in the comments whether you think Aleksi's extraction was a setup from the beginning, whether Byron's meeting comes back to bite him later in the season, and what you think happens to Joe's family now that their cover is completely blown. If you want the Episode 3 review the moment it's live, subscribe, and I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.